For this video, we're working on the sheet called Original Pivot. There is very little knowledge needed to create a pivot chart, as they are automatically built from our pivot table. The main thing to be conscious of is the amount of data that we're charting, as that will determine whether the chart is readable or not. Make sure that one cell in the data is selected and that you're on the Analyze Contextual tab heading. In the Tools group on the right of the ribbon, we will see the Pivot Chart button. Click on it. Column is the default type of chart selected, and we can see its various subtypes shown on the right. We can also see the other types of charts listed, such as line, pie, bar, etc. Now we're going to stay with the column chart, and we'll leave it at the default subcategory that's selected. And click OK. And there's our pivot chart. It can be moved and resized, just like you would with a normal chart. But you can see that a pivot chart is different because it has drop-down menus. That means that the chart is dynamic. Let's click on the region drop-down, turn off the Select All, choose East, and click OK. Now let's click on the location drop-down. Select Dublin and click OK. I'll just move this chart to the right and we can see that the pivot table reflects exactly what's happening on the chart. Let's click on the location down arrow, set it back to all and click OK. Now from the pivot table this time, we'll do the same with the drop-down for region. Pivot charts are totally connected to pivot tables. You change one and the other will update. However, a pivot chart cannot exist without a pivot table, whereas a pivot table can happily exist without a pivot chart. Now, we might prefer to have the chart on a different page to the pivot table. Well, that's no problem. It's very easy to do. Click on the chart to select it, and we'll see that we now have 3 contextual tabs, but they are all specific to the chart, as we're now in the context of the chart itself, not the pivot table. Click on its Analyze tab, and we will see the Actions group, which has the Move Chart button on it. Click on it. Our chart is currently a floating object in Original Pivot, this sheet. But let's put it onto a new sheet. We can leave the name of the sheet as Chart 1 and click OK. A new sheet containing our chart is created to the left of the sheet that we were on. It still works in exactly the same way. If we click on the region drop-down, turn off Select All, choose East, click OK, and if we now move back to the original pivot sheet, we'll see that the pivot table has indeed updated. Let's click into the Column Labels drop-down and choose Clear Filter from Region. If we move back to the Chart 1 sheet, we'll see that it is updated. We'll return to our original pivot sheet. Now, by the way, we could just have selected the chart and done a straightforward cut, and then the chart would have become a floating object on whatever sheet we pasted it to. In the next video, we're going to look at another way to filter pivot table data. If you're moving on to that next video called Insert and Use Slicers, then you can keep this workbook open.